Good day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Our deepest apologies for the late start, but it's great to see everyone here. My name is Sunita Rajakumar, and I'm the founder of Climate Governance Malaysia. We are delighted to welcome you all to this session on decarbonizing shipping, a non executive director's perspective on the opportunities and pitfalls. This event is part of the inaugural Global Summit on Climate Governance, organized and hosted by the country chapters of the Climate Governance Initiative in collaboration with the World Economic Forum. With a lot of prompting from Ms. Karen Fawcett, a non executive director based in Singapore, who will be summing up this session for us, thanks to her generous assistance, and also of Deloitte, with whom we have been working closely with, we have been able to secure the support today of highly regarded speakers, such as Morten Christensen from Maersk, Dato Ruben Yanalingam from Westport, Mark Neutmans from Blau Cluster, and Michael Parker from Citibank to shed light on their pivotal role of guiding companies to manage climate risks and build an effective climate governance for the shipping industry. We are looking forward to hearing the views of these highly experienced thought leaders who are at the forefront of combating climate change. Shipping is one of the hardest to abate industries, accounting for an estimated 80% of the volume of global trade and thus considered the backbone of our economies. The increasing levels of carbon emissions generated mirrors our economic growth and our individual demands for goods. In the Deloitte report, which is available online, we are reminded that the International Maritime Organization set an ambition to reduce international shipping carbon emissions per transport work by at least 40% by 2030 and 70% by 2050 of a 2008 baseline. For those businesses which want to be aligned with Paris, they will also need to consider offsetting solutions for deeply entrenched emissions to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And the Race to Zero is also an international COP26 campaign. So these ambitions send a strong signal to the shipping industry that immediate action is needed and all parties involved need to be prepared for this sea change. The conversations will be moderated by Tarek Helmi of Deloitte, who is a partner in strategy and operations with a focus on energy, resources, and industrials. Tarek has a passion for the energy industry with extensive experience in strategy led transformations, in addition to operational experience with an international oil and gas major. Tarek is also a leader in Deloitte's Future of Energy initiative. It gives me great pleasure to now welcome Tarek to give us an overview and then to moderate the panel discussion. Tarek, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Sunita, and hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Really a great pleasure to be here and to moderate this session around decarbonizing shipping and what it means for NEDs. Now, for many of you, maybe or some of you now attending the session, shipping might not be a topic that is on top of your head, and also the topic of decarbonization in this sector. But the situation is evolving and evolving pretty quickly. Historically, shipping, and it is still today, one of the most important industries in our sector. It is by far the most efficient means of transport. And also, we've seen its importance in the past year or so in maintaining our global economy. So it's a very, very important and significant industry. The situation is changing around decarbonization in the sector. The sentiment is evolving. Many companies are making promises. The IMO, like Sunita said, is putting a lot of measures in place. But while progress is being made, the pathways to get to net zero are not simple and not straightforward. And there are many dilemmas that the industry needs to deal with to get this moving. And this means that many NEDs need to understand the sector really well, understand what it means for them, and also start to make choices within the space. Now, this does not only apply to shipping companies, but it applies to the whole ecosystem of shipping, starting from the customers and how they ship their goods, but also financiers, ports, shipping operators, and many, many others. Today we want to learn about what this all means, and success, I think, for us is to that you all come out from this webinar understanding the implications of it, the dilemmas, some of the positive signs that we see also in the industry, and most of all, what it all means for NEDs. I really have a great pleasure today to have a really impressive panel that I'll be moderating with Mark, Morten, Ruben, and Michael in it. So without further ado, I suggest we just start with the questions. If the panelists can please put on their videos and go off mute. Let's start with an overarching question just to get us going. And the first question is, how important is decarbonization as a topic? And specifically for the shipping industry? I'm going to start with you, Morten. You're the leader of decarbonization at Maersk, so great to get your perspective.
Thank you very much, Tarek. Can you all hear me?
Oh, good.
All right, thanks. Okay, thank you for that, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's I'm very happy to get the opportunity to speak to such a distinguished crowd. Yeah, so to your question, we, at least in our company, we consider it to be a strategic imperative for our industry. I mean, we simply have to solve this problem. The way we look at it is that, so we have been part of building and running global supply chains for more than 100 years, actually, for our company. We believe that has done a lot of good to the world in many ways, and we would like to keep facilitating global supply chains. But the way we see things and what we hear from our most advanced customers is that we simply cannot keep running global supply chains emitting so much CO2 as we do today. So we firmly believe that 5-10 years from now, many consumers simply cannot accept that a pair of sneakers that have been sewn in Vietnam or elsewhere and then sail to Europe or the US or wherever they are consumed, that they have been spewing out CO2 all the way. They simply cannot accept that. And that means that the problem needs to be solved. And the way we see it, either our customers will solve it themselves without us, or we will solve it for them. And we have taken the stance of solving the problem for our customers. So we are determined to decarbonize actually the full supply chains, so also on the land side, but now we talk about shipping. And this is where we have the biggest footprint. So we are determined to decarbonize our operation at sea as soon as possible. We stated a couple of years ago an ambition to be carbon neutral by 2050, but we will do it as soon as we can, because that is simply what we need to do.
Very encouraging, Morten. Maybe same question to you, Michael. You're a leader in the Getting to Zero coalitions. It would be great to get your thoughts on the topic, and also what sort of conversations are happening on this topic in the coalition.
Well, I won't repeat what Morten said. Obviously, he set it out very clearly, and let me congratulate Maersk on the leadership they're showing, and they've done it across many issues in the industry, but this is the most important, and as Morten said, in the end, it's the consumer and its society as a whole that is driving this. I think the other thing for the shipping industry specifically, and for an audience that may not be sort of familiar with it, shipping as an industry has been very inward looking. It's a global industry, but it is, although regulated by the International Maritime Organization, it's not as heavily regulated, for example, as the aviation sector. And so it has, in a sense, been a victim of its political weakness in that context. And so when it comes to the fuel currently used, although we moved to low sulfur fuel at the beginning of last year, the so-called sludge at the bottom of the barrel, the bunkers that used to fuel many ships, we know that had a direct impact on the health of people who lived in coastal communities. The World Health Organization suggested that 750,000 people would not die prematurely in those regions with that move to low sulfur fuels. So there's a direct impact from the actual assets. And so decarbonizing clearly is also part of that. I think Sunita raised it in her introduction around the importance of the growth of global trade and what the IMO forecasts would happen to shipping emissions with the expected growth of global trade if nothing happened. And that clearly shows that shipping as a percentage of all emissions would rise dramatically. where I think things have begun to change is really in two areas. The first one, and apart from what Morten has talked about, which I think is a key theme, because the consumer is now the consumer through and shareholder through banks, through companies, is now focused on this issue. But the other two areas I think we're making quite a lot of progress is shipping used to be an industry that had sequential decision making. Everyone waited for someone else in the supply chain or the manufacturing chain to make a decision before they moved. We've seen, and I think accelerated to some extent by COVID, much greater collaboration. And in the Getting to Zero Coalition, we've made huge advances in getting consensus on objectives and how to deal with this, and better knowledge. And I think that collaboration, which brings in the energy sector, as well as the manufacturing, the shipbuilders, if you like, and the cargo owners, that collaboration, I think, is crucial, and that will help, I think, accelerate this. The energy industry is key because this is also about the reindustrialization globally of every industry. And the energy sector clearly has an incentive to do that in terms of its business, let alone its environmental responsibilities. And shipping, because of the role in the supply chain that Morten referred to, shipping is a great opportunity, given that shipping will be a fuel user, an alternative fuel user, as well as to a large extent the global carrier of those fuels as they move around the world. So it actually connects with every other industry. And I think we're beginning to get the message across that the decarbonisation of shipping is in fact a proxy for the decarbonisation of global trade, or at least the supply chains. And so I think that crucial role shipping plays globally, as opposed to the rather siloed, inward-looking history, if you like, of how shipping has looked itself, I think that's a big change. And I think that's going to help move this agenda forward.
That's excellent. Michael, I really like the point on, you decarbonize shipping, you're also helping other customers with their own, scope 1 and scope 2 emissions as well, as you do so. Mark, you're an NED on a number of boards. I'm sure this topic is being discussed there as well. What are your thoughts on it?
No, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more than with the two previous speakers. It's always difficult to make a point when you are the last speaker, but I have a few things to add. People often talk about the shipping industry as if it were one big happy family, but it isn't. It's a very fragmented industry, and so of course, when you look at the examples of the leading companies like AP Moller Maersk, these people really understand and Morten made absolutely the right point. The driver for the decarbonization of the shipping industry will come from societal change. It's the customer who at a certain moment, because as Michael said, the industry is very inward looking. When I teach my class at the University of Antwerp, I always start my lecture by saying, it's the first class of the year. I said to the students, the shipping industry is an industry for retards. Welcome. It's not the most advanced industry, except if you look at the big leading players. And that is, so the combination of the big leading players like AP Moller, etc., and the involvement of the customer will drive that change forward. But let's not forget Michael from the Go to Zero Coalition, rightfully so, but there you are preaching for the converted. If you look at the bulk carrier industry, there's 17,000 ships out there with 4,500 different owners. It's so fragmented, and most of them couldn't care less. I had an example not so long ago in the European network of maritime clusters, where there was a Spanish ship owner just saying, first they forced us to do something about ballast water treatment, now they want to change the fuels, and the only thing we want to do is make money, and the only thing they do is add cost. That is something you still hear, unfortunately, a lot within the shipping industry. And I think that's where non-executive directors have a big role to play. You have to, if you are a non-executive director, you have actually no technical basis or maybe not even intrinsic knowledge of your of the industry, and that's where you have to ask the right questions as a non-executive director. Say to people, query them and say, but is this right? And don't let them lead you into a fancy story about OPEX and CAPEX, etc., etc., etc. But as I said, and I think it's maybe going a little bit back to what Morten said and what Michael said. Societal change is key. I firmly believe now there are already big clients like charters, especially if they are or big government clients in government institutions who are pushing the industry to clean up their act. But I firmly believe that in the years to come, even your basic customer will not accept anymore, just like Morten said, that a pair of sneakers carries a high CO2 footprint. But to make maybe another point that we want to address also during this session, the shipping industry is incapable of self-regulation, unfortunately. And I've been in shipping industry for more than 20 years. Unfortunately, it's incapable of self-regulation. So the regulation will have to come from somewhere else and has to be enforced. It's the voluntarism of the happy few will drive it, but it will not be enough to push it through in, let's say, all the peaks and corners of the shipping industry. Unfortunately, as I often say, good ship owners have no idea what bad ship owners can and will do.
Great. Thanks, Mark. And maybe we end this round with your thoughts, Ruben. I know you also have very strong views on the topic of decarbonization. How important is it from you're the global managing director of a port. How is this relevant for you and also for the shipping as you interface with them?
Well, if Mark thought he was the last, it's even harder for me going forth. But I think, when it comes to decarbonization, I think we have to understand why we need to decarbonize first. Right? And for us in the ports, I think it's very crucial to understand that all this carbon is leading to rises in the sea levels. And I think that's, for ports, if the sea level rises too much, unlike ships can still sail, but we will be underwater, right? So for us, I think, why we need to decarbonize and why we need to push for it very hard is very simple. For us, it's survival. And I think, if we don't, a lot of ports will be underwater, but, I think we're not too late. I think we can still try and change that. And that's why it's very crucial that everybody understands this. But I agree with Mark wholesale. It's actually, at the end of the day, it's up to the consumer. If the consumer changes and pushes this harder, I think then we will have a good chance of doing that.
Thanks, Ruben. Well, we started to speak about some of the dilemmas, one of them being the consumer and the customer. And so far, there are some consumers who are expressing their interest in more sustainable products and sustainable supply chains. But as we engage with many customers in the industry, the situation is still not very clear. Demand is not there yet. And also many are not willing to pay for it. So how do we do that? How do we encourage that demand? Morten, maybe let's start with you this time.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. No, I think actually that demand is there. I think so. We are a container liner, and I think that is a part of shipping that is actually blessed with being closer to the consumer than some other parts of shipping.
Absolutely.
Some of our biggest customers are branded companies who face their consumers right on, and they are indeed interested in paying a premium. We actually today have a product called Eco Delivery. It runs on biodiesel. And we have customers buying that. And we have recently announced that we will launch our first carbon neutral vessel in 2023, and that it will sail on carbon neutral methanol. And we will have no problem selling those volumes for sure. Because the reality is actually that, and it may be a little bit provocative to say, that yes, shipping is hard to abate, but then again, it's not. Because it's just about putting some new fuels into the tanks, and those fuels will cost a bit more, but that's it. That's all you need to do. So I mean, yes, we are going to have to produce very large amounts of these fuels. I mean, just our company will need 20 million tons of green methanol if we were to sail our entire fleet on that. And today the market is zero. So that's the challenge, of course. But again, I mean, it's about investing in these new green fuels. It's a huge business opportunity for many people. And all it comes down to is that when you buy a pair of sneakers, you're willing to pay 5 cents more. And when you buy a laptop, you're willing to pay 50 cents more. When you take, even if we double our fuel bill, the impact on the goods that you buy in the stores will be counted in cents, not even in dollars. So is that hard? Yes and no. We actually work under the assumption that we will not be constrained by demand. We think that we can, and if we get the demand there, we can scale this up really fast, actually. And again, I think it's back to what Mark said. You as directors, you need to coach and guide your management teams to do the right thing and not to optimize for the last dollar, but actually to optimize for something else. And the reality is also that actually emitting CO2, it incurs a cost on society, right? It's just not being paid by those who emit, but it does incur cost on societies. And I think more and more of our customers get that. And if that means that they will need to pay some $100 more for a container shipped from Europe to Asia or wherever, I think that is actually, Bill Gates talks about the green premium. It's actually a relatively small green premium when we talk about container shipping. So and I think also if you look to some other industries, I mean, they are building steel plants in Sweden. I mean, it just sounds to you like the worst idea ever. It's one of the most expensive countries in the world, and it's not a good market. But they're still building steel plants because it's green steel. They compete in a different market. It's a superior product to non-green steel. So I definitely think that demand will be there. And I think, again, you as directors play an important role in actually driving that demand, because I think, as has also been mentioned, we should not rely on the regulators to drive this alone. The demand will need to come from consumers and from companies. But we are also seeing quite an acceleration actually of the demand over the last couple of years for sure. So so that's how we see it, and that's why we are working hard to get our first vessel out in 2023. And what we actually also said was that every vessel that we build for our company in the future will be able to sail on carbon neutral fuels. And I think that's our commitment to scale. So it can be done.
Excellent. Oh, that's really promising, Morten. And Mark, just to get your thoughts, we hear a lot that everything has to be passed, or not everything. It will be passed to the customer, the consumer, to be able to pay for it. And once you distribute it, it becomes a smaller amount, just as we heard. But we also hear that there's a time lag between when you need to make investments and then when you're able to pass them on moving forward. Keen to get your thoughts, Mark. How do we do that?
Well, that's a big issue, Tarek, and again, I'm very happy to hear what Morten. Of course, I'm a keen follower of what one of the leading industry leaders in the shipping industry does. But it took 15 years within the IMO to come to an agreement over IMO 2020. So can you imagine a ship owner has a very expensive, long lead asset that he is going to have to pay for over 20 years or 25 years. And now he has to make decisions on what that future is going to be. And indeed, if you have customer proximity, then it's easier to make them do the right thing. But not in value, but in volume, 1/3 of the world fleet are still bulk carriers, carrying coal and iron ore for making steel. This is the consumer there is just a large factory on the other side, and to put pressure on them to decarbonize is quite big, because actually they transport coal and iron ore, and from that they are going to make steel for the construction industry. And you construct by using steel and cement and concrete. Now, 2.7% of the emissions of the greenhouse gas emissions come from shipping, but the production of cement and concrete is 8%. So you're there in one of the most polluting industries in the world, and we have to also and that is why I say societal change will be a big difference. So the role of the customer, as Mo said, is absolutely true. And for sneakers and stuff like that, it's soon going to be a no-brainer. But for people who have to build a house, or for large infrastructure works is a little bit easier because you can put pressure on governments. Governments can also say, we need to do the right thing. But that's why I plead for global regulations. And as I said, yes, there are 174 members in the IMO. And it's unfortunate that it takes then that the decision-making process is very, very, very long. But the industry is not being served by local initiatives. The EU is mulling emission trading system, which actually emission trading, I'm a big fan of emission trading systems. Emission trading systems reward the early adapters. So it makes a whole industry much better. But you need a global emission trading system. And so the EU wants an emission trading system, and China is just watching what the EU is going to do before that they will decide that they will also include or not shipping into their own emission trading system in China. And so that drive, like Michael said, that drive that we need for global regulations. If you accept that between 80 and 90% of the world external trade is carried by ship, then shipping has been the driver of globalization. If that, or maybe not the driver, the facilitator, the enabler. I mean, it's a hugely efficient industry. The cost of transport of a finished product, the fraction of transport is less than 1%. So it's a very, very efficient industry. And if we want to make that enabler greener, which we desperately need to do so, they have been sitting on the fence already for far too long under the idea of, yes, but we are the most environmentally friendly mode of transport. Yes, but that is not a reason not to do something, because the global village still expands. There will be more and more transport. So global business requires global regulations. And that's, unfortunately, we have only one forum for that. That is the IMO. And the ship owners do not sit in the IMO. It's governments that sit there. So you can have consultative status or whatever. So we need to put pressure there. And yes, as Morten said, if you have customer proximity, it's easier to do. If you don't have customer proximity, there's a lot of ship owners still out there that just sit on the fence and have something like, wait and see what they will throw at us. But I agree with Morten. Technically, it's not a big issue. For most of the fuels that are going to see us, no, it's not a big issue. Not even for ammonia.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And maybe, Michael, good to get your thoughts here about what's coming next, about COP26, about the race to zero. What are the expectations there in terms of, would it impact customer demand? Would it have an impact on potential regulatory changes? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think the first thing is the change of administration in the US on this issue. I don't want to be political, but on this issue, clearly has had the US re-engage in the IMO and re-engage in the climate change conference. And John Kerry, President Biden's envoy on this, was in the UK and Europe last week or the week before. And he was delivering a message: the US is engaged and the US does not want certain things to happen on a sort of regional basis. I think there's a sort of acceptance global regulations will emerge from regional regulations. But I think what the US is saying is, let's talk about this in Glasgow and in the lead up to Glasgow at COP26, so that we try and bring together regulation in a way that makes sense. Now, the issue for the IMO, I think, is the IMO's ambition of the 50% cut by 2050 now looks very feeble against all the net zero commitments being made by companies and governments. So we would expect the COP26 to ask the IMO to raise its ambitions. It's important for people to know that the IMO is a UN body. The UN Climate Change Conference can tell the IMO to make changes, if you like, to its ambitions. And it can, of course, agree in Glasgow that the decisions it makes there should be followed through in the discussions in the IMO in order to avoid some of the politics that may emerge subsequently. But I think you have to see this as, you know, there's the official regulation through the IMO and other regulators. So, for example, in the financial sector, banks and investors, we've all signed up either to self-regulation through well-known institutions. One of the issues that's caused concern for everyone, I think, is the so-called taxonomy. What is green? What do we mean by certain things? And investors are crying out for a common language about carbon emissions, a common set of standards that investors, regulators, and ultimately, of course, the consumer, because it's the consumer that also wants to understand what these things mean. We've heard a lot about greenwashing, and I think a lot of the so-called greenwashing is disappearing because people are putting much more scrutiny on it. So it's this sort of combination of official regulation, which has to go faster. And I think I'm an optimist that the COP26 will do that. And then all the unofficial regulation, like things we've done as banks with the shipping industry through the Poseidon Principles. I think that the last point I'd make on this, I think, is we know it needs market-based mechanisms. We know carbon pricing is coming, has to be part of it. It is much better if that is, the principles are somehow established at a global level, and then you allow for regional variations to the extent it makes sense for certain economies. But I think we're going to see carbon pricing as the big topic in the next few years. And I hope that Glasgow is the first time that really we bring that together globally in a way that can help pay for this process.
Excellent. Ruben, good to get your thoughts. As we think about shipping, you have to think about the ecosystem, and also ports have a role to play there. Interesting piece of information that we read is that 20 ports around the world control or manage 45% of the global container trade. So there is a concentration on ports, and ports can play a role in embedding regulation or putting policies in place to support decarbonization as well. So good to get your thoughts on this.
Well, I think regulation, done by the IMO, I think is far more effective than regulation at ports generally. For ports, as I mentioned just now, for us, the crucial thing for us is I don't think we need regulation to motivate us because, there's a survival need to motivate us, as I mentioned earlier. And I think that for us will be the biggest driving force in terms of trying to make sure that we get greener ourselves. I think ports today, not many have committed to a carbon neutral time frame. I think a lot will be coming soon. I see a lot of other ports around the world trying to do the same thing as well. And, as part of the supply chain, as you mentioned, we have to come back to the fact that, going green is going to cost everyone, as Martin pointed out just now. We need to charge our customer more so that they can charge their customer more. And eventually that goes down the chain so that the consumer can be charged more so that he can choose, how to go green. But I think one of the other parts that we keep on missing in all of this is that, consumers in general, I think, have the demand for these kind of sustainable products and services, but they don't have enough information. I think that's one of the biggest problems out there today, that whilst they want to choose the right thing to do, it is much harder to choose that right thing if you don't know what that right thing is. And I think, as Michael pointed out just now, carbon pricing, I think, will solve a lot of that because, it will add the premium, the green premium, to the product and service so that people can understand and make the right choices and choose, and choose the fact that if they want to buy unsustainable products and services, it's going to cost you more. It's going to be less affordable in the future. I think affordability of green is one of the issues, but but it's always mixed up with the fact that actually, ungreen products or unsustainable products are actually more costly to the environment, to society, and actually more costly to produce if you have that carbon, pricing mechanism in there. And I think that's what we have to get back to. I think, regulation, etc., is good, but a market forced, thing like, a tax, I think would be even more useful than regulation in trying to solve this.
Maybe Morten, good to get your thoughts. Every time we talk about decarbonizing shipping, the discussion moves quite quickly into the fuel and the technology, and which one is going to win. Is it going to be methanol, hydrogen, ammonia, or what? Good to get your thoughts on this one as well. What do you think will be the future, and is it really important to focus on which one exactly?
Yeah, thanks. No, so we think there's going to be a portfolio of solutions that we are going to go for. So we believe very much in methanol. This is what we will go with first, because the technology is most mature. You can actually get an engine for a vessel that can burn methanol. You can actually retrofit existing vessels to burn methanol at a reasonable cost. And it's a liquid. It does have a lower flash point than marine diesel, but other than that, it is a much better fuel to handle at sea than ammonia. But we do also believe very much in ammonia. It's a bit further out. Engines are not ready, and even further out, you can imagine fuel cells would be even better for ammonia. But ammonia is a gas and it's toxic, so it just comes with a lot of challenges, both in terms of how you operate it on the vessel, but just putting a toxic gas into a combustion engine, it's just, it's not a great idea unless you have to, but we do have to. So we do also believe very much in ammonia. It's just a bit, it's a bit further down the road. And again, these fuels can be produced in a carbon neutral way. You can produce ammonia, both ammonia and methanol from these power-to-X technologies. And then furthermore, methanol can also be produced from biomass. So there are different technologies, and it'll be a race to find the lowest cost for properly carbon neutral fuels. But it's important to bear in mind here that you have to take a cradle to grave, or sort of a will to wake approach to these things, and do life cycle analysis, because otherwise you can make some really bad decisions along the way. But both of these fuels, ammonia and methanol, if they are made in a carbon neutral way, they are great solutions for the future.
Mark, do any of these get into these details of which fuel, which one is the best, or what should they do?
There's many angles to approach this, Tarek, but thank you, Morten, absolutely, for mentioning that ammonia is very toxic. I have worked for 20 years for the largest mid-size company or mid-size carrier owner of ammonia transporter in the world, for Exmar. I mean, I've been a master and a chief mate on ammonia carrying vessels. This is a highly, highly toxic product. So anhydrous ammonia, I mean, one whiff of it's not like the thing you wash your windows with. Anhydrous ammonia will kill people almost instantly. It will bind violently with water. So putting this in an engine, and I think that's the crux of the matter. There's 2 points I want to make. First is, unfortunately, I think that when we discuss the fuels of the future, technically most things are possible. And as the thank you, Morten, again for illustration of ammonia, there are some drawbacks. Ammonia is it's toxic, but for instance, the volume that you need to store it is much smaller than if you would, for instance, use hydrogen as a fuel, which according to me is crazy. But one of the biggest points is ship owners have to order a ship. And imagine that you are not a big player, but that you are a very small company with 4 or 5 ships. There's still plenty of them around. You have to order a new ship, and you have to decide now what fuel it is going to consume, or more or less what types of fuel it is going to consume. That's a huge investment decision. Before, it was very simple. Everyone had the same fuel. And whether then the 380 Centistokes heavy fuel oil was at $750 or at $250, ship owners would complain anyhow, but at least everyone had the same problem. And now you have to make an investment decision that might backfire. People who have installed scrubbers for the IMO 2020 compliance were really betting on the spread between low sulfur fuels and the traditional high sulfur 380-70 stokes. It was less than $100, which it has been for a bigger part of the first year. You were actually losing money. And in an industry that is very competitive with very small margins, actually, you might bankrupt your company if you made the wrong choice. So that is a big dilemma for small ship owners. And that is why I go back to one of the points. I love the voluntarism in certain parts of this industry. But in my opinion, it's not the ship owners, unless the very big ones like Morton's, AP Muller, who will play a role in this, but it's not the ship owners, nor the engine builders, nor the classification societies, nor the shipyards, who will actually be the big decision makers in the fuels of the future. It's the ones who will provide the supply chain for that fuel. Will someone be willing to produce green methanol? Will someone be willing to produce green LNG for fuel cells? Because hydrogen. And that is one of the main issues. And we've seen some examples. LNG is now considered as a transitional fuel at best. Rightfully so. You know, I come from an LNG company, but we were never believers in LNG as a fuel ourselves, for the simple reason that from well to wake, this is not a solution. I mean, if you if you take LNG out of a well somewhere in Texas and you use shale gas, and you're gonna put it in a cruise ship, where it is very popular nowadays, from well to wake, this is not a carbon neutral solution. At least, thank you, Morten. I see your thumbs up. No, it's absolutely. So we have to think about this, but someone will then have to provide that supply chain. And so what shall it be then? Hydrogen, ammonia with all its risks, biofuels, but then who will produce these biofuels in sufficient quantity? Batteries, maybe for smaller ships, but certainly not for big. So nuclear. Some people are still saying, yeah, nuclear. There was a Greek ship owner not so long ago. Let's go back to nuclear. The drawbacks of nuclear are much smaller than but then you think, and that is what is the most puzzling. And then I'm addressing the audience again and not the experts that are my colleagues here. But you're a non-executive director. You're sitting there and you have this whole wide choice, and you're going to have to pick one, and that's going to be it for the next 20 or 25 years, because conversions of ships also. So it's an almost life or death decision that you have to make for that company. You might really bankrupt your company if you make the wrong choice. And that is a very, very difficult thing. And I believe, and I'm still watching what, for instance, the big oil majors, like the Totals, the BPs, the Shells of this world, what they are going to do. And I think they're very much watching what the big players in the industry are doing, because they will have to set up the supply chain. LNG as a fuel, people have talked about it for 20 years. The supply chain for LNG, virtually non-existent. People have invested $50 million in an LNG bunkering carrier. You can explain, I will challenge every shipping expert to explain to me that you can make even a smallest profit on a $50 million costing LNG bunkering vessel. That's impossible. So the supply chain is important. We have to provide, as an industry, as a shipping industry, the clear signal that we want to decarbonize. And thank God that there are still large players out there that say we make some choices, because that will give an incentive. But actually, the real decision, I'm afraid, will be made by the ones who have to provide the supply chain for those fuels.
Very interesting perspective, Mark. So it's going to be at the end the fuel suppliers who will, or at least contribute it and drive the change. We have to stop because we have a lot of questions coming in, and we don't have a lot of time left. So maybe, Michael, I'll maybe go to you for the next question. it's a complex topic, or maybe it is an easy topic, as you say, Morten. So, Michael, what would you advise NEDs to do, given all the dilemmas and the conversations? What's the one or two things you'd advise them to do?
Well, I think the first thing is you can't ignore it. And as hopefully you've heard from us today, the industry, whilst fragmented, the leaders in the industry are really trying to move the agenda forward. I think one of the things you should do is to get informed. I don't want to advertise Bill Gates's book. He doesn't need the money, but he does, in a very readable way, articulate a view on why this is a challenge. And the reason is he has influence. I mean, the technology industry is a huge emitter. I think it's about 13 or 14% of emissions, but it needs people like him who will have influence over global leaders to talk about it. I think you should read. So read The Economist, the Financial Times, your local thing. Just get up on the subject. There's a lot out there, and I think that will help you be informed enough, if you like, to question your management teams about what they're doing. Look out for the development of standards across different sectors, particularly the financial sector, because shareholders ultimately are going to be asking questions, and they'll ask questions because investors are asking questions about whether companies are meeting the standards that they want as shareholders. The last point I'd make is I think carbon emissions will take greater precedence in the next couple of years over cryptocurrencies, simply because people will understand carbon emissions maybe more, but going back to the consumer will be asking those questions that Morten and Mark have described. The last point I'd make, Alok Sharma, who is the UK government minister and president of COP26, was asked by a colleague in a city investor forum what two things he wanted big companies and investors to do before Glasgow. The first was sign up to the race to zero. He feels that that's what the corporate sector should be doing. And secondly, he said very clearly, we want the supply chain to be decarbonized. So look at your partners in the supply chain and collectively help us do that. And I think that message to me says that the shipping industry will get the attention of senior politicians and decision makers. And let's hope the wider political issues don't get in the way of China and the US and Europe and everyone else coming together in Glasgow to really make some important decisions.
Big expectations on Glasgow then. Ruben, collaboration is always mentioned as a key topic when you talk about decarbonization, and it's always specifically on industries which could be hard to abate or renamed not so hard to abate. What's your take on collaboration, and how can whether ports or financiers and shippers all come together to drive change?
I think there's two ways to look at that. I think we are working with many of our customers to see how we can help them decarbonize as well. So things such as shore power for the ships and things like that will be, trying to help our customers do that. And of course, with regards to, say, on the land side, we're trying to encourage more rail cargo in that sense, and therefore reduce the number of trucks coming to the port. And even for the trucks coming to the port, if we can help them utilize the fact that they don't go back empty, that's also very useful to try and cut down emissions overall. So I think that's one of the easy ways of collaborating from an operational perspective. But I think one of the things that we have to do in terms of collaboration is to understand that we all need to make a change, and we all have to pass that cost, and that change is not going to be free. It's going to cost something, and we need to pass that on to our customer, who then needs to pass it on to their customer, and then so on and so on and so on, so that eventually it gets on to the eventual customer. Now, this is something that politicians don't like, because it means that costs will go up for some people who can't afford it. But I think, at the end of the day, that's what has to happen. I mean, the burden of trying to save the planet is not just on the corporate side. It has to come from the consumers as well. And I think a lot of companies want to make a change because they feel that customers want to do so. But, I think customers, maybe in Europe and maybe in the US, are ready to pay, but there are some customers out in Asia who are probably less likely to be able to afford to pay. But I think it has to happen, and they have to change their consumption patterns to suit, buying products which are more sustainable, and services which are more sustainable as well. So I think with regards to collaboration, I think we all have to understand this part very, very closely. that, from the financiers to the shipping lines, to the ports, to the forwarding agents, to customs, to everybody, that there will be additional costs in all parts of that supply chain. And that cost, as the politicians drive us to change this, to decarbonize, that cost will have to be passed on, and eventually somebody will have to pay for it. Right? Either consumers directly through their purchases, or consumers directly through the amount of tax they pay the governments, and the governments will then pay for it. So one way or the other, consumers are going to pay for it.
Great. Thanks, Ruben. I think, we're running out of time. So maybe before we end the panel, I would like to do like a quick fire round to get your opinions. Maybe one word or one statement based on the discussion today on the topic of decarbonization. What would that word or phrase be? And maybe start with you, Mark.
I firmly believe that our future lies in, at, and by the sea. The sea will provide all the answers for the big questions that we have nowadays, be it food, be it energy, or clean air to breathe. That's where it's going to be.
Great. Really like that. Morten?
Yeah, I think what I would say is that now is the time. I mean, this is the decade where we need to do it, and we are the generation of leaders that should do it. So I would just encourage everyone to lean in and start leading, because otherwise we will leave a world for our children and their children that we cannot be proud of. So now is the time. This is urgent.
Ruben?
Basically, for everybody, not just NEDs, but for all humankind, I think we all have to prepare ourselves to pay for the carbon that we choose to consume.
Great. And maybe to end, Michael, with a positive note as well, your side.
I hope it, well, I'm optimistic, but I think what COVID has taught us is the importance of transparency in order to come up with solutions that benefit everyone on the planet. The health of the world has been challenged by this pandemic, but climate change is a bigger challenge for the world, and we have to start dealing with it now. And if COVID has helped people realize that, then at least something good will come out of it.
Excellent. Well, I really want to thank you all. It's really encouraging to see the passion that you have for the topic and the commitments that you're all making in this space. I think this is how things will change, and the commitments that you all have. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over now to, I think, Karen to close off this session. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Tarek. I leave this session, it was incredibly thoughtful, feeling very heartened that shipping's an industry where the leaders recognize the climate challenge, and some of the companies are already in transition. Personally, I've taken 4 messages away. Firstly is the massive scale. I think Michael said it right at the beginning, decarbonisation of shipping is a proxy for decarbonisation of the global supply chain. I think you've given us considerable hope with large companies like Maersk making climate change a strategic imperative. I'm looking forward to that green methanol ship first voyage in 2023. I think it's also this necessity to collaborate and change across the industry. Ruben, I'm struck by your comment that if we don't fix the climate change, the ships won't have any ports to go into. And a dose of reality from Mark, and I think this is the same with many industries, the nature of the shipping industry, historically fragmented and inward-looking, possibly weak on self-regulation and slow with long leader assets. I'm thinking of the NEDs having to make the long-dated decisions on future fuels with uncertain supply chains, even for LED. Regulation. Michael, you've mentioned that COP26 may be essential to actually instruct the IMO what to do. And for all of us, that every company we're in, every board, all customers are going to have to bear the costs when we move things around the world. So I think on behalf of Sunita and the team at Climate Governance Malaysia, can I thank you, Tarek, and your team at Deloitte, and all our fantastic panelists, Ruben, Mark, Michael, and Morten, for such an insightful session. There's no doubt that CGI is going to have to come back to shipping soon to hear the continuation of the journey. So before we sign off, a quick reminder to everyone that the Global Summit continues tomorrow, for the rest of the day and tomorrow. And I'd like to highlight a couple of sessions tomorrow. One on executive pay and ESG with Willis Towers Watson. And the second, which after this session is extremely relevant, on carbon markets to effectively price and how we offset emissions, which should offer us some practical solutions. So many thanks to all our panelists. Thank you for joining us, and goodbye.